Thank you so much. I am so thrilled to be here, you guys. And so I'm really excited to get started. As Diana said, a little bit about me. I do come from the corporate world. I have over 20 years in the food industry. Being part of corporate meant that I constantly planned. So, as Diana said, I have many years and different experiences growing different teams. It was really common that we would probably plan about three months before year end, and then it went all the way into the new year. So I constantly planned, and what I realized was that planning didn't mean that you actually got stuff done. So the title of today is really about planning so that you get stuff done. And today, what I do, where I spend the most of my time with, is working with entrepreneurs and students so that I can help set effective goals and get stuff done. So hopefully, today we'll get a little bit more into it and shed a little bit more light on what that means for everybody. As I said, if you do have any questions, I like to be as interactive as possible. If you can, please type it out in chat. I do have it fairly visible, so I can take a look at where you guys are, either have some questions or get stuck. So in terms of the agenda for today, why do we want to even goal set at all? And I wanted to kind of go through some 5 keys for effective goals. And while we're going through these 5 keys, I'm going to show you some really kind of quick and easy things that you can go and do. There is a work book. I don't know if you're able to get to it, Diana, if you can maybe post it. I know the video will be available, as well as the PowerPoint will be available. So if you guys want to kind of follow along, feel free to do so. If not, just jot things down as you go. If you're a pen and paper sort of person, do that. If not, do it on your computer, do it on your phone, whatever works. And if we do have time at the end, we'll get into some goal hacks as well as some Q&A. So Diana has a poll that she's going to help me launch. I just wanted to kind of get a quick sense from everybody. What is your experience with goals? So there are 2 questions here. We'd love to know how frequently you set goals. And then secondly, how frequently do you actually achieve those goals? So given that some of the things I'm seeing coming in is that you guys are really actually very active in goal setting, and the achievement is actually fairly high. So I want you guys to ask any questions that may be not on the page. Not knowing where everybody's coming from. Some of these things are fairly fundamental. Some of these things are a little bit more new. So I think we can close it now, Dana. It feels like we've got a pretty good.
Yep, I closed it.
Okay, awesome. So I don't know if you guys can see this, but a lot of you are setting goals fairly frequently. And no surprise, you're kind of seeing some success. And it's not surprising, because there was a study that was done at Harvard, which was they tracked the graduates of the MBA program. And 10 years later, they looked at how many people actually set goals. Surprisingly, coming out of the MBA program, almost like over 2/3 of the people didn't actually set any goals. And the 14% that actually had goals set, but it was in their head, they didn't actually write it down, they were 10 times more successful. Now, success honestly was kind of, up to the people who did the survey, but it was a collection of different factors, ranging from salary to job satisfaction. So it wasn't just one thing. And then surprisingly, 3%, only 3%, I was actually pretty shocked by that stat. Only 3% of the people actually had written down goals, and they were 30 more times more successful than the 83%. So if you were one of the kind of the percentage of people, and I think actually our stats were exactly the opposite. So luckily we're attracting a lot of people. You guys are all very kind of familiar with the act of goal setting, but the whole entire point is really not only is it important to set goals, but it's important to actually be able to write them down. And we're going to kind of get to that in a minute. Again, super interactive. Please just join on the chat. What are some of your goals for the coming year? Is it to find a new job? Is it to lose weight? Is it so as you start to think about some of the typical ones, And actually, I kind of wrote ones on here that are fairly typical ones that people, kind of put out there, especially as you look towards the new year. Feel free to type it on the chat. I'm just going to see who has started. Okay, so there's some people around starting a new career. I love I set goals for fun. Love goals. They don't love me. These are great. I'll accept, get a promotion. Wow, that's a lot of goals. Photoshop, learn a new skill. Great. Work to complete every day. Finish business plan. Great. These are great goals. Such a great start. So keep these in mind as you go through them. And those of you who haven't been able to kind of type it on in chat, if you have something in your mind, please do write it down, even if it's just jot it down on your phone. As we go through the next hour and a bit, having that in mind is going to be critical, because the steps don't really mean anything unless you're starting to write something down. So even for me, you're going to see some of my goals that I'm putting out there. I do try to do one at least once a year, a big one. And then as I'm going through them, I kind of mentally update them. So something that I want to get better at is actually writing them down, because honestly, before I started goal setting, it was a little bit like, okay, if I have it in my head, it'll be fine. So I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with goal setting. I know that it's really critical based on all the research that I know, but it is onerous. Like, let's get serious here. There's a lot of steps. There's a lot of things that we have to always kind of keep track and do. I would really love to kind of hear you guys in terms of your examples. So more stats for you guys to know. How does goal setting actually help? So this was an interesting fact that I actually found out. Our brains are actually trying to pick out 50 pieces of information. This is all we can handle, but we are actually absorbing over 11 million bits per second. So as I'm talking to you, the things that you're actually absorbing are like highly visual. So the picture is what you're absorbing. You might be picking up one or two things that I'm saying, but honestly, the rest of it, you're just kind of like, it's just passing you by. And that's the way things are getting past your brain right now. So what goals do is actually set those anchors for yourself. It creates patterns for you. It creates a color and a routine, and it helps you make sense of the information. So our brains like routines, pattern, and easy things to process. Without goals, literally you're trying to find 50 pieces in 11 million. So for those of you who responded, rarely set goals, or if you're only setting it 1 to 4 times a year, there is a really good reason for you to set them regularly and to, kind of track and as you go along. So I wanted to talk to you about 5 keys to successful goals. And these are really based on some amazing scientists that started looking at goal setting theory, Locke and Latham. So they identified that there were 5 major things that you should really have in order for successful goal setting. So I've modified some of the wording, but the principles really apply. The first one is making sure that you're connecting it to a purpose. So we're going to talk about purpose. We're going to talk about clarification of goals. The third one is about challenge. And then at the challenge part, when we finish that, we'll take a quick break, and then we'll come back and talk about writing a plan and tracking and feeding back. Any questions so far? Anybody surprised by some of the stats? I was actually really surprised at the Harvard one, and I was really surprised by the 11 million bits per second. I really thought that we were able to kind of pick out things a little bit better. I know some of the stats that are supporting that, but it's always a little bit of a surprise to me how little we're actually absorbing. So the act of goal setting is really key for us to achieve some of the things that we want to achieve. The first step that I want to talk to you about is really this idea of connecting your goals to a purpose. And it sounds a little bit silly to say, because I mean, a lot of you guys have written down things that are probably quite important to you, right? So I'm seeing here funding application, I'm seeing being more healthy, finishing business plans, learn a new skill. So what's important is that for all of these goals, find something that is really important to you about accomplishing that goal. So it might be a person, it might be a value, it might be a cause, it might be something else that's really important about accomplishing this goal. And then the reverse side is, what sacrifices are you actually willing to make for achievement of those goals? These two often are don't go hand in hand. We often think about what there is to gain, right? If we're successful in our promotion, we'll get more money, we'll get the title. But oftentimes we don't think about the hard work that needs to go in. So when we are grounding our goals in the purpose, it helps us start to imagine what that is. So I want you guys to think a little bit about what some of those goals may be able to get you in terms of the gain. So like I said, they're either personal values. So if there is something around learning, mastery, connection, maybe it's a social justice cause that you are feeling really passionate about. It might be somebody that's really important to you in your life. Could be a problem that you're trying to solve if you're trying to get healthier. Maybe there's something in it that's really, truly important for you. So I want you guys to think about what that is. And then on the reverse side, think about some of the sacrifices that you're willing to make. So whether it be personal time, money, title, experience, these are all really important things to consider before you start into the goal. Because guess what? When your goal is to lose weight, but it's like super dark outside or it's raining, those are some of the things that are going to prevent you from actually making that sacrifice because it hasn't actually fully manifested in your brain. So if you've done that, I just wanted to kind of share a common one. This was actually one of the top goals that are on 43things.com, start a podcast. So I've often thought about this. So I thought, okay, let me write this down in terms of gains and pains. So my purpose would be to inspire people to actually be kind leaders every day. And I thought about, what could I gain when I reach this goal? So I will feel like I can actually shed light for others. This goal is important to me because I want people to know that you don't have to be a bully to be a leader. There's lots of examples of that, but there's also a lot of examples of people who have the ability to be a kind leader and to be gracious leaders. And for me, I thought about, what sacrifices am I willing to make? A big one is around rejection, right? What if I get no from people? What if I get criticism from listeners? I might, kind of lose some money by investing in trying to create this podcast. There's going to be a lot of personal time I'm going to have to give up. So, there's probably other ones that I haven't considered, but those are the four that I came up with. And I thought, this actually might be worthwhile doing. I actually really hadn't thought about it as a major goal. But as I think about the goal of connection, the goal of inspiration, the goal of trying to make somebody see another example and potentially inspire them for that moment. So that was kind of one example that I put down. Let's say for you, if you're still kind of struggling with some of the pains and gains, close your eyes for a minute and just imagine that if you've achieved your goal, let's say in a year, and somebody that you really value has written you a thank you note, and you've achieved your goal, whether it's you've launched that business, whether it's you've gotten that application, whether it's you've actually lost the weight that you wanted to lose, or you've gotten healthier. Think of who has written you a thank you note, and what does that note say that you will value or that you love? So just think about it for a minute and jot it down for yourself. Again, like mentally jot it down or write it down on paper. Who is that person that's written that thank you note? Feel free to share it on chat if you guys have some idea of what that looks like. And then if you do have the workbook in front of you, again, if not, feel free to just jot it down on a piece of paper when I reach this goal, I will feel like, and I think I had, I feel like I will have shed light on for other people. And jot down a little bit about what's important to you. Why is this goal really important to you? This step is critical because oftentimes when we get to the goals and it gets hard, we'll give up. It gets tough. It's not worth doing because it's not rooted in a really big purpose. It's not really rooted in anything that's worthwhile to us. When we root it in value, when we root it in somebody that's important to us, and we know what we're about to give up and what we're working for, it has a lot more traction. It has a lot more chance of it being successful. Again, looking for some reactions if you guys have any thoughts or ideas in terms of how this relates to some of your goals. So for some of you who wrote down those new skills, talk to me about some of the things that may be really important to you. What's the value? What's the person that you're doing this for? And honestly, if you're not a sort of a person who loves to write it down, jot it down for a vision board. So I created this for myself in terms of the goal that I had for kind of creating that podcast. Really thinking about kind leadership, thinking about the vision of the person that I want to help, the companies I have helped, and then some of the things I'm giving up. So again, jot down for yourself what that might look like in terms of vision boards, what it might look like in terms of purpose. The second step that we're going to actually now do is bring some clarity. Bring some clarity to your goals. What does it look like? How does it actually feel when you get to successful? So I love that, Tamara. Doing it for yourself to feel empowered and confidence. Yeah, those are the values that you really are owning. So have that vision for yourself of what that might look like. So every time that you're trying to accomplish a goal, there it is. It's rooted in some pretty powerful values. Thank you for sharing. So as we're clarifying, there's a couple of steps here that I wanted to walk you guys through. One is looking at kind of the difficulty of your goal, and then also the importance of how it aligns to your purpose. So let's say that I had a goal of kind of the podcast, right? Or I wanted to launch a new business. Obviously, launching a new business is going to be pretty high in difficulty. And if you guys do have a goal in mind, just think about it for yourself in terms of where it falls into the difficulty and where it falls into importance for your purpose. Either type it out in chat, or you can feel free to use the annotate function and kind of mark it off. Where might it go for your own level of skill and also the importance to your purpose? Again, this is really important because oftentimes we set goals, but we haven't thought about, where it falls in terms of the effort that's required, in terms of the importance to our purpose. And as we start to get into it, it becomes really either too overwhelming, and so we give up, or it becomes not important, and then we give up. So it's important to start thinking about it before we launch into it, so we can actually start to prioritize it a little bit. So some of the ones that I would encourage you to start out with is the easy and important. So some of the ones that might be super easy, but very important for you to do could be just to feedback and track. So we start implementing it today. And so if there are things like that where you feel like that could be doable right from the get-go, start putting it into place. And we're going to get into feedback and track in a couple of in about 30 or 40 minutes. So we'll get right into that as soon as you write it down, right? But there's going to be ones that are a little bit more difficult and important for you to tackle. And we're going to go through how we might be able to break that down a little bit. So for that one, you want to make sure that it's rooted in purpose, that you have some clarity around it in terms of what that looks like, and then also the plan. The last one that I would encourage you guys to drop is stuff that's super difficult and really quite not important, right? So again, have that filter in your mind of what that might look like for you in terms of importance to your purpose. Yeah. And that's true, right? So somebody just typed out that they started with something that had a purpose in mind, but has changed over the pandemic. So that's a great point. Goals often change when there's something really huge that's happened, and you may have to change how you approach it, and maybe the importance has changed. Um, yeah, so somebody has just said that the business plan is usually one that's really, really common. So I'm going to kind of walk through the plan and feel free to actually put some of the ones that you've struggled with a lot. Because it may be just you're stuck at a certain point, and as you're breaking it down, you're going to actually highlight somebody that you can ask for help from. And oftentimes we find that that is the most difficult step in the planning step, is we've actually kind of forgotten about people that we can reach out to. There may be somebody that could help you clarify on the plan. Most of the time it's in that step that we're falling down. So as you're starting to go through the priority, if you're feeling like, yeah, it actually could be in the difficult and important, let's get to the clarity and let's get to the plan, because that's usually where it's stuck on. Another benefit of the clarity is really allowing some focus and priority. So I know we probably all know SMART goals. SMART goals apply here. It doesn't go away, but I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a different way to approach it. So I want you to describe what success looks like. And for some of the entrepreneurs that I work with, you guys know how I do this, right? We talk about what you're envisioning success to look like, and we actually talk about what you would want to do and what some of the metrics look like. How do you know when you reach success? So feel free to define some metrics for yourself. So somebody had said business plan, somebody had said, kind of getting healthier. So tell me what that might look like when you reach that point. So for you, if you have a successful business plan, what does that look like in terms of metrics? How will you know when you've reached it? So think about that a little bit for yourself. Yeah, constantly adjusting. That's okay. Your plans will constantly adjust. And goals may be a little bit less so, but still plans and goals will constantly adjust. But where it really won't change is your purpose and your value. So as long as you're staying true to that, the how you're going to get there could change easily. Yeah, and the happiness factor for sure. And that goes back to your pains and your gains, right? When we talked about that very first point, your willingness to be able to give up some of the stuff that you have to give up may, as you launch into it, you might discover that that's actually not what's going to make you happy. And we're going to get to something pretty quickly in a minute that's going to allow you to adjust that. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. So again, I work with a lot of businesses that are trying to launch in 6 to 12 months. So let's say somebody's goal was to launch a bakery business, right? And the vision of the successful goal is to have a bakery that's got actually unique flavors that's different than any of the competitors in their area. So pretty simple goal, right? You might even be able to envision that success to be, I have a certain number of customers walking in. So that could be one of the key metrics. So I just wrote down some metrics here. Maybe you want to have 12 different flavors of donuts. Let's say my bakery is specifically a donut shop. And I'm generating $2,000 to $3,000 a month. I want to launch in 6 months. So you may have more metrics there, but I would try to keep it no more than 5. 5 really key ones. Because now what we're going to go do is make sure that you develop some actions according to each one. So you don't want to have more than 3 to 5. You also want to have, the more fleshed out your vision is, the better. So I have a paragraph here, but you might want to add more paragraphs in terms of what does that look like? right? It might even have a physical location of where that is. You might have the square footage that you want. Maybe you have ideal neighbors that you have next to it. These are all things that are going to bring that flavor to life in terms of how you envision what that is. And again, for some of you guys who had a little bit of a loftier goal, like maybe it's to get a grant, maybe it's to, again, launch a new business. You may want to really flesh out of what that looks like. And some of you, I'm going to kind of go back to some of the ones that are a little bit more difficult. So let's say you had a business plan. It could be, I envision it to have 20 to 25 pages. I want to send out to 3 to 4 different organizations. I want to have these sections in it that will have been tackled. I want to send it to 10 people to read before I send it out to those 4 people. So you want to have a couple of different metrics that you can now hang your hat on. And then we're going to talk in a little bit of time on how to potentially adjust that and to flesh out an action plan for that. So it's really important to have some of these key metrics. It's really important to describe what that vision of success is, because without that, you are going to start thinking, you're going to get into the weeds right away. And where our mind goes oftentimes is there's a whole bunch of things that are going to prevent us from doing it. And naturally, our mind is going to help protect us from doing the easiest thing possible. So remember, our first step was the pains and gains. Oftentimes what happens is when we get to this stage, a whole bunch of reasons for us not to do it come up. And in fact, we'll have friends and families who are going to say, hey, it's actually really hard. Have you looked into this? You might potentially lose money. So-and-so already launched this. Something else already exists. So you're going to hear a whole bunch of things that are going to keep you down the path of not doing it. Just because that's how our brains are wired. Like, honestly, our brains are wired in such a way that we like to do things that require the least resistance. The path of least resistance is where we're going to go. So that's why I started with the purpose, because when you get to this step and you start hearing those things that prevent you from going forward, go back to step 1. Go back to why you're doing this in the first place. Go back to why it's important, because without step 1, you'll never proceed forward. You'll stop exactly at this point and you'll give up. Not your fault. It's not your fault. It's how our brains are wired. It's wired in such a way to keep us safe. It's wired in such a way to protect us. The easiest way to protect ourselves is to make no change. But guess what? It doesn't get us anywhere either. Yeah, so feel free to follow along the workbook. And where I wanted you guys to kind of tackle is that second part right now. Take a moment, again, write down what your goal was. So if it was to start a business, I think somebody said freelance business. I think somebody said that they wanted to kind of get more healthy. What does that look like? How do you know when you've become more healthy? Does it look like you can actually, walk for an hour without getting tired? Or does it look like you can actually run a marathon? I don't know. It's going to be whatever's unique and specific to you. I think somebody had said business plan. Again, what does that look like? What does success look like when you've written your business plan? What does that look like for you? And then write down some metrics. So I had here, just for your reference, some key metrics were number of different flavors or recipes, revenue goals, and then the timing. So remember, I said SMART goals still apply. It does still apply here, but I've just kind of distilled it down to 3 key things that you can actually touch and feel. Yep, step 1 is the purpose. So what's your purpose? So what's the gain that you're going to make? So feel free to go into the worksheet. You can actually see it in the worksheet that's posted on the chat. But if you actually are able to identify in step one why you're doing this, what's important for you, what are the things that you're going to be able to gain from it? So it might be a value, it might be people, it might be a cause, it might be a problem you're trying to solve. But these things are truly, truly important for you. And if it is to make $1 million, okay, tell me why. What's important about the $1 million? Is it financial freedom? Is it power? Is it fame? It could be that, but write down something that's really, really important for you. Because when you get to this part, then you can start to say, well, what does that look like? What does my success look like? Does it look like I can actually travel on a whim? If it's $1 million, we all like to get there, I'm sure. But it doesn't make a difference until you start to write down some key metrics of what that looks like and what you're actually willing to do to get there. Any questions so far? I'm just going to stop to see if anybody's got any comments or questions. And if you do have some metrics that you'd love to share, please share, because I think this will help everybody else as well in terms of how to proceed on your goals. Okay, this third piece has changed the way that I think about goals. Because I used to kind of set goals to go, okay, here's the point, that's where I'm gonna meet it. And somebody actually typed out happiness factor. This is the key that's going to make a difference for you. I always knew that there was a thing such as like kind of it's too aspirational, right? Like we set goals that are too hard and we give up. I knew that. What I never actually thought about was that there was a minimum where we're so uninspired. And again, lots of studies have been done where when the goals are too low and when it's too easy, we also give up. So you want to look for that zone of growth where at the A point, which is you're just cruising, you're not challenged, it's super easy. So like I said, where for somebody who was saying like they wanted to get healthier, let's say your comfort zone is actually being able to do like 10 minutes of walking. That's really easy for you. That's nothing. But B, where you like hit max burnout, maybe you're running for 10 minutes and that's max burnout. So you know that your zone of growth is somewhere between walking and running. So it might be a light jog. Maybe you're doing 5 minutes and 5 minutes of walking and 5 minutes of running. So that's a physical manifestation. Let's say you're doing a business, right? Like, let's say you're thinking about launching a business. Your A could be that you're just, kind of doing on the side and you may be spending like 4 or 5 hours on the business in a week. But your max burnout is actually trying to launch and get into it full time in 6 months. Maybe that's just way too much. So you've got to start dividing out what that point A and point B look like for yourself and reach somewhere in the middle. That's actually where the magic happens. So as you're starting to think about setting goals and looking at what those key metrics are. So those of you who wrote down some of the metrics, start to think about where that metric really is going to be at that zone of growth. Yeah, so thank you for sharing about creating a product that can actually teach the next generation. So think about what that actually might look like in terms of metrics, right? Is it you're selling it to 50 people in 6 months? Is it that you are testing out a prototype, right? So think about what those key metrics might be. Yeah, great, Cindy. So those of you who kind of hit that burnout level, and I know a couple of weeks ago, we actually had an energy and renewal workshop. So know what that B point looks like and think of like the A that's super easy to do. So that's going to be important for you to strike somewhere in the middle. And you may want to just go a little bit past A and not all the way closer to B, but you'll know where that point is when you start to think about the goal. So where I want you guys to think about, again, kind of the zone of growth is if you're in that comfort zone of like, yeah, that's no problem. I can do that super easily. Like that's not even a challenge. You want to go a little bit past that. And the panic, you'll know when you're feeling like that pit in your stomach and you kind of want to throw up. It's okay if you're feeling that a little bit, but if it's like to the point where you literally can't go on, that is too much. That is your panic zone. That's anxiety. That's not growth. So, now I've gotten to the point where before I do a workshop, I feel butterflies, but I'm not feeling to the point of, oh my gosh, I have to throw up. So those of you who are getting to that stage for your goals, that's past the zone of where you need to be. So stay in that learning zone where you're feeling a little bit excited, you're feeling a little bit nervous. There might be some, kind of jitter associated with it. That's good. When you're feeling tingling, when you're feeling like, yeah, this is actually going to push me, that's where you want to stay. And again, think of those metrics that look like that. So if you set metrics in step 2 and you kind of went, yeah, I can do that, that's not a problem, then I want you to actually think about upping it. And I want you to think about what that max is. So set an upper limit because that's going to be your burnout zone. So let's say you wanted to lose 5 pounds, right? Or you want to lose weight. And one of your metrics was the number of pounds that you want to lose. What I want you guys to think about is that upper limit. I want to lose at least 5, but no more than 10. So I actually started doing that, and it's actually done so much for me to aim for that upper limit. So magically my mind goes in between, right? I'm going to go, okay, I'm going to grade 5 papers in an hour, but no more than 8. Magically your brain goes to 6 and 7. But it's starting to really focus. So remember when I said in the beginning that we are processing over 11 million bits per second. These anchor points really help you focus to aim for that bullseye. So try that out for a little bit. Again, go back to your step 2 when you've written down some metrics. So if anybody's written down some metrics, let me know if you can revise it a little bit and get to kind of that upper limit. So again, you might have said, okay, I want to make a certain amount of money in 2022. Let's think about what that metric looks like, right? That might mean that you need to meet with 5 clients a week. So adjust it at this point to say, I'm going to meet at least 3 clients, but no more than 7. So start to really zone in on that growth zone, because it's really going to shift your brain. It's really going to shift to where that magic point is. Because I think we often go for either the aspirational or we go for the low point. And what we fail to kind of do then at that point, we're shortchanging ourselves. We're not hitting that magical bullseye that's going to really propel us forward. Like I said, I actually had not realized that when it's too easy, we give up. It's too easy. I've done it. It's not a challenge. Our brains like a little bit of challenge. Our brains like that, just that extra little bit of feeling like we've accomplished something. Great. I'm glad that you love this idea. I really, like I said, I've been putting it into practice, and it's really worked wonders for myself. Every book that probably will get you into burnout. So for sure, set that upper limit. And again, like you're sacrificing something else, right? So it might be really great for you to have the gain of mastery and like excitement, but then there's something else that you're giving out. So think of what you're giving up. Absolutely. If you could read every book, I know you would. Great. I'm glad you guys are appreciating the examples. Okay, so I'm going to give you another example that I had for the bakery business, right? Let's say, I wrote down some of the metrics in step 2. I'm going to have a bakery with unique flavors, different than any of the competitors. All right. So I had some great metrics. I had, 12 flavors. And so now that I know that there's this kind of idea of the growth zone, I'm going to go back and actually revise my thinking and say, I'm going to launch at least 10, but no more than 20. So I've given myself that growth zone of 10 to 20. And I said already 2 to 3K, right? I already gave myself a bullseye, but then I kind of went, you know what? But my upper limit is actually 5K per month. So that's going to be at the zone where it's going to be really a little bit of a burnout. There's still more to do, but let's just think about where that upper limit is for now. And so for you guys, if you've written down some goals, and again, Michelle, if your goal was to read as many books as you can, like think about logistically how many hours you actually have to be able to do that. And you got to work back from what that upper limit is. So that's an example of where you could actually attach an upper limit. Of course, we'd love to all do as many as we can, but the reality is there's only so many hours in the day that we have access to be able to do these things. So start with what that free time, quote unquote, looks like and work back from there. And my last example that I had was I originally, if you remember, I said I want to launch in 6 months. So I kind of said, okay, well, I'm going to aim for the 6 months, at least 6 months, but no longer than 12 months. I've given myself that upper limit of 12 months. And guess what? Immediately when I do that, my brain's going to go, okay, I've got some room. I've got that zone of growth where I can go either between 6 to 12. So not only does it allow our brain to function in that zone of growth, but already I can feel a little bit of room to be like, okay, I'm not holding myself to 6 months. So if I go to 7, I go to 8, I'm still in the zone. I'm still okay. Michelle has no hours. So $0. So $0. Yeah, Cindy, you can use this for anything that you want. Set any of the goals that you feel like is going to be the priority for you. So something I didn't talk about in the beginning, but I can definitely share with you guys at the end if we have time, is I use with the guys that have gotten coaching from me, they know, I use a wheel where I start to prioritize and look at some of the areas that you want to focus on. So we can talk about that a little bit at the end. But let's assume that you've identified some goals that are really important for you. And as you're going through these steps, go through the purpose, go through the clarification, and now we're at the, kind of adjusting it so that you're aiming for that magical growth zone. Yeah. So if your goal is to how to put together a quality team, you've got to go to step 2 and actually put down for yourself, what does that look like? What does a successful quality team look like? And list down 3 to 5 metric of what that looks like. So it might be that you have a full-time staff that's doing business development. It might be that you're securing X amount of revenue per month. It might be that you're getting together for an hour a week to brainstorm. So you want to put some metrics in place so that you can envision what that successful team looks like. That is very, very difficult, Cindy. So I would say that one of the things that you have to clarify for yourself is where that priority sits. So remember in the very beginning, I had kind of that quad of where you actually feel like it's important for your purpose. So you do need to go back to that and figure out what's truly important at this point. You may prioritize some over others. It doesn't mean that they don't all get done, but they can't get all done at the same time. So that's a great point. It's a really great point. So I'm going to go back to actually the quad for you guys who may have missed that part. Oops, I just missed it. So when you've defined your purpose and your overall purpose, right? And this could mean that it's somebody who's really important. Maybe you're doing it for your family. Maybe you're doing it for your kids. Maybe you're doing it for a loved one. Or maybe you're doing it because you want to become the best at something. But there has to be something to anchor you, right? Oh, Wayne, that's a good one. So I would make sure that you quantify something around the quality of work ethics. So I've heard this from somebody actually that they said, oh, I want my staff to be proactive, or I want them to be able to solve things on their own. So my question back to them is, what does that look like? How do you know when you've reached that work ethic? How do you know when you've achieved success? So go to step 2 and actually be able to articulate what's the difference between somebody who's got that work ethic and somebody who doesn't? Are they coming to the table every week with 2 different ideas? Are they doing research on 2 competitors? So you've got to be able to distill it down to some key metrics. Does that help? Okay. So far, so good. Okay. At this point, I'm gonna maybe take a quick break. I know Diana said that we usually take a break around 7. We're a little bit before because I don't want to get into the planning straight away. I want you guys to maybe just walk away, digest it. I'll be here. If you have more questions, I'll be online. But if you want to kind of take a quick break, stretch out your legs, come back, feel free to do so.
Okay, great. Let's take a quick 5-minute break.
So those of you who were able to join us in the first half, we talked a little bit about some of the keys for great goal setting. And really the back half is now starting to get into the nitty gritty. So the first half, think about that as kind of how to actually set great goals. But the last 2 pieces are about how to actually get it done, how to execute, how to make sure that you have something that you can move forward with. So one of the things that I always like to be able to do is get your everything on a page. So remember, we talked about your vision, your why. So if you can put that at the top in that triangle part in terms of why it's important for you to do what you're doing. So remember, if you don't recall, this part was maybe there's somebody you're doing this for. Maybe there's a value that's really important to you. Maybe there's a cause. So for me, my example that I used for the 2 was one was around kind of sharing and letting people know that there's a way to be a leader by being kind. So my why is I want to inspire people to be kind leaders. And again, it needs to be important to yourself. So that purpose is pretty important for me. And hopefully, as you start to unfold the rest of the plan, it all kind of connects, right? So let's say my goal number 1 was to start a podcast. Maybe I want to start a podcast in order to show people what that potentially could look like. And remember, we had what that goal looked like in terms of the success, and then some metrics that would follow accordingly. So perhaps my first metric was I want to have at least 3 speakers lined up. Maybe my second metric is to, kind of get it out there and get at least 100, followers. So these are some of the metrics I might have. And for me, now it's actually getting to that bottom step of developing a plan in order for me to be able to get out there. And what's really important is that you want to make sure that you do have that purpose and the goal in order to ground your plan. So feel free to use some of the material that's in the workbook. That house that I had in the slide before is not in there, but you can pretty much like kind of write it out. It's fairly easy. I do have a couple of different examples for you guys to look through in terms of a plan. What I always like to do is start from the end. So often people are kind of creating a plan from today until where you need to go. But I almost like to envision it like a year from now, where are you going to be? So when we started thinking about that end goal, that vision, Start from that vision and work backwards. What I mean by that is, let's say I wanted to launch a bakery in 6 months. What I would do with the plan is not start from today. I would start actually from 6 months and work backwards. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. And what's, again, really important is that you want to allow for some time for things to go wrong in between, if you have the time. If you don't, again, go back to that zone of growth, and maybe you have to stretch it out, or maybe you have to give up something in order for that to happen. You also want to include some people and resources that could possibly help. And so I've put some formats here, but it's really up to you, and you want to use the tool that can best suit you. And again, all of you guys seem to be doing this already in the upfront poll, but if you are one of the few people, or if you are one of the people, not few, but if you are one of the people who does not write it down or doesn't have a tool, make sure you do. Plans in your head are not really plans, because until you start to see it and you can break it down, it doesn't really take shape. It doesn't really, kind of get executed. Yeah, Asher, you have a question?
So you said that a plan that's in your head is not really a plan. So what about people who who have photographic memory, so they can just store it and then use the exact same data again?
And I think that is amazing. Most often than not, you have to share that plan with some people, right? If you're starting to work in a team, that's another true benefit of having a plan that's written down, is that you can actually start to share it out with people. Even if you don't work with a team, you're trying to get feedback from somebody. So I have a lot of people who are trying to launch businesses that come to me, and then they go, okay, I want to launch a business in 6 months, but I don't know the steps. Well, unless they write it down, I don't actually know what's in their head. So they may remember every single step, and that's great, but it's really difficult to get feedback. It's really hard to get somebody to help them if it's not written down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Great question. So it has a lot of benefits in terms of being able to collaborate, being able to actually work out some kinks, right? So remember I said you want to aim for that zone of growth. When you start writing it down, you're able to actually see, maybe I've budgeted not enough time for this. So let's say, maybe you're trying to do a school project, right? And your purpose might just be as simple as, hey, I want to get a really good grade in this assignment, and I apply to a good school. She is an example that I usually with a group assignment, because they're and I always try to remind them that the goal is really to just complete and make sure that everybody has a role in it, right? That's at the end of the day, most of the group projects are like that. So remember, what I said was start backwards. So let's say it's due by the 17th. We're going to work backwards. We're going to have a lead, and we're going to have major milestones. So if you're one of those people that can think really, really in detail, great. I've structured this for people who don't like to plan. So maybe you just want to think in big chunks, and you want to think in big milestones. So start here. Don't get overwhelmed by every little single step. If you are one of those people who like to see every single step planned out, go ahead and do that, but have a way of just keeping these big milestones so that you can actually envision at every single step what that success might look like, what the metrics might look like. So everything still applies that we talked about. It's just now that you're starting to write out the steps in order to reach those major success points. Okay, does that make sense? As you're starting to write these things out, what is really important for you to remember is highlight or circle the one that's most important for you in the next 7 days. Okay, because remember our very first thing that I said, right? Our brains can only handle so much at every single given moment. So you want to make it as simple as possible for us to achieve what's most important in that moment in time. So let's say you've mapped it out, we're now in this week. So hopefully we've already met and brainstormed this topic. If we haven't, I have to shift it and make sure that this is highlighted, right? Otherwise, we're going to focus on the second step to just say, this is my main focus for the time being. And I have to make sure that I'm getting in touch with everybody, that we're all contributing on Google, and we've checked it through. Okay. So that's like a school example. I'm going to give you guys a work example. Let's go back to my launch a bakery in 6 month example. Okay. And some of you had talked about building a team or getting a business plan together. This works the same way. You start with your due date or whatever your most real due date. If there isn't a due date, create one. So some people have told me that they want to do a workshop or they want to launch a new business. But unless you've got an actual due date in mind, it doesn't create that urgency. So make sure you've got a timeline in mind and work backwards from there. So it may be 6 months, it may be 12 months. And remember, we had that zone of growth, right? So it could change. You could end up extending it out to 8 months. But let's pick a date and let's say that it's 6 months in advance. So I picked a date in May, and we're going to say we're going to have new products ready, and I'm going to work back from there. So somebody actually mentioned in the chat, and I thought it was a really good point, that sometimes you don't really know what the steps are. So if you're getting to this point and you're saying, hey, I want to launch a business, but I don't actually know what the steps are. This is where you go to that last column and actually jot down some resources that you can use. So I have here some of the major steps that you would need for a new product. And if you don't even know what these steps are, I would say reach out to some people that have launched a business before. Reach out to the small business centers. You heard Joshua talk in the beginning. So there are resources around you. If you don't even know what those are, reach out to some friends and family and say, hey, do you know anybody who's done this? I'm really looking for some help or advice that can get me going. Yeah, it's pretty tough to relaunch for sure. So again, for those of you who have hit that burnout point and you're just kind of trying to gear up again, don't force yourself to go immediately. Give yourself some time, allow yourself to be able to go back into that zone of growth. It's really important not to restart right away if you don't even have the energy to do it. So be really mindful and be really careful of self-care. You may want to actually join a group of people. You may want to tap into some resources that are existing so that you're not doing it on your own. So again, aim for that zone of growth, okay? Be really mindful of not burning yourself out and asking for all the help that you can get to this point. Don't do it on your own if you're feeling like, hey, I can't actually even muster up the energy to plan. Stop at step 3. Honestly, it's not meant to push you into that panic zone again and push you into the zone of burnout. Okay. But if you're ready and you already know kind of where things maybe went off and you want to get to that point of being able to see the end in sight again and having some great metrics in place that feel reasonable. Again, go back and test out some of your assumptions on that zone of growth, right? Maybe you had metrics for revenue that were too aggressive, right? Maybe you have to scale back and look at what that might look like. So I kind of laid down some milestones here on working backwards. If you don't know what any of these things are, don't worry. If they make sense to you, great. But what's important is that, again, these are major milestones that you would have. And I've worked out some due dates that could potentially apply to you. So take a moment and start thinking about some major milestones for you as you work backwards. Again, think about what that success looks like. So if you wanted to build a kick-ass team in a year, so in a year's time, how do you know what that looks like? Maybe it's a key hire 6 months before that end due date. So let's say it's a year from now, maybe by the end of June, you've had a key hire. Maybe in a month's time or a month before that, you've instituted an employee handbook. Maybe before that, you've actually started having regular team meetings. So you want to have some key things that you can work backwards and start to put in place so that you can start to build towards that vision of what that looks like. Does that make sense to people? Okay, awesome. All right, here's another personal example. This is a super common one. A lot of people want to pay off debt, right? So we're going to switch gears a little bit. Instead of kind of the lead and, the timeline, it could be that you are generating some ideas and looking at priority and an effort that's required. So I switched it up a little bit just to give you guys another way to approach planning. So let's say I'm trying to save at least $250, but no more than $400 a month in order to repay my debt. So I've put some options down here, and I've put some priorities of how important that idea is and the effort that's required. And then I've put down some actual tangible ideas to make that happen and what that looks like. So remember, making it as clear as possible, put some metrics in place, and some notes so that you can really start to pick out what's the most important one. So after I did all 4 of these, I kind of said, you know what, this one's actually the most doable. Even though it's got medium effort, I actually think that this is the highest priority. Make 2 meals a week doesn't feel all that impossible. So again, think about zone of growth. So 5 times a week probably is too much. But if I said twice a week and no more than 3, so it's going to be 2 or 3, right? And I can actually prepare the 2 meals night before. That feels entirely doable for me. So you're going to have a different number. You're going to have a different approach. But that's what is important about this, is that you're adjusting it for your own purposes. Yeah, question.
Why didn't we take into account the price or like cost of a grocery initially?
Yeah, you could, right? So I actually did here. I cheated a little bit. I didn't write it out. So
Okay.
I actually thought about that. So I thought about $15 a meal, right? That's kind of pretty average, times 2. And so I'm actually saving $120 per month, but I only said $25 a week here, which is about 100. So I allowed for
Okay.
$20 for groceries. I kind of did it, but instead of like kind of distilling down to the real numbers, here I'm giving you guys some examples, but I actually did go through that exact same thought. So I'm glad we're on the same page.
Okay.
Yes, it's important to take that into account. Any other questions? Okay. So again, for your own goals, take a moment. If you've been following along, great. If you haven't, that's okay. You can leave this until later on when you've filled in that 3rd step. It's really important to think about what those key metrics are, so that you can start to plan out and look at stuff in reverse. If all you have right now is the end due date, fine, put that down. Put that down to say, this is where I want to be. This is where my due date is. And then think of the kind of one prior, the milestone that you know is going to be right before that. Okay, and I've included some other resources for you guys to plan. Again, like I said in the beginning, there's not one size fits all. I've given you a work back schedule, an example of that. That's the one that I love the most. Another one that I use quite often is a really simple kind of to-do checklist. So if you recall, when I showed you guys the prioritization thing in the very, very beginning, one of the really easy things to do is, if you have something that's super easy and actually quite important, put it in the to-do list. That's the only time that you should be using a to-do list. Otherwise, it becomes a laundry list of stuff. And I'd be curious to see a show of hands, like how many people actually get stuff done on a to-do list. There's going to be some that are really great. I use a to-do list when it's easy things to do. When it's a complicated thing like business plan or launch a business, I have to distill it down to the most simplest component. So if you are going to put it in a to-do list, distill it down to these things where you can actually say, okay, I'm going to send a product out to 5 to 10 people in this week. That's when it's really useful. Or I'm going to make 2 meals a day or 2 meals a week, pardon me. So actually put it down in your to-do list to be like, make lunch the night prior. So distill it down to its most basic component and put that in the to-do list. Because otherwise, if you put down reduce phone bill by $20 a month, it's not going to get done. It's really, really hard because your brain hasn't processed how to do that, what to do. And if you're one of those like really super talented people who can just do it, then you don't really need any of this. So you can keep doing what you're doing and you can just kind of create your own path. But this is really, I'm kind of hoping that people who are struggling to set goals to be able to take something away. I'm just reading some notes here. List for each focus, and that helps me great. Yeah, so you're doing planning, whether you know it or not, Cindy. Your list is your plan. That's what you're doing. So you're kind of doing, you're just not calling it a work back plan. So I would say if you can make one change to it, almost like kind of work from reverse, and then see, instead of like a to-do list, it's almost like, what are the major milestones that you need to hit? If that makes sense. So I've got some simple project plans if you guys want to use it, and some Smartsheet. Canva has actually some great planners as well. And then for those of you who are much more kind of comfortable with platforms, especially if you have a team that you're collaborating with, Asana, Trello, all of these are really great. It really just depends on what your preference is in terms of style. Trello, I find, is really great for people who like collage and boards. So if you're a Pinterest type of person, you'll love Trello. If you are more of like a kind of step-by-step logical, Asana is probably a better fit. So, some of the ones that are great options for you guys. Any other ones that people have used you guys want to type out here on chat? I've used pretty much all of them. And I do find that I still go back to the, kind of super simple note-taking to-do list. It still works really, really, yeah, same. I do too. So if you are one to use a platform, feel free to use these, but I still use my phone's to-do list too. And I've actually created priorities using it. Again, when you can distill it down to a very simple task, to-do lists are great. It's not useful when it's a really complicated thing that you need to plan out for. Google Calendar. Oh yeah, Google Docs, absolutely. If you can though, use some of the columns that I've created for you guys for the Google Docs, because that'll keep you kind of focused on where the priorities are, how much time it's going to take. Post-it notes, less useful because they actually are not organized. So I would say if you do have Post-it notes on your computer, try to transfer it all in one place so that you're not looking in different places. Great. A notebook is also really useful. Again, try to use some of the scheduling tools if you do have them. When we get to kind of this component, Okay, when you're starting to get into this kind of work back, for every single major milestone, I create an event in my Google Calendar to say, okay, this is the date that I should be getting stuff back. So it creates that urgency again. So I see some questions, some hands up. Yeah, go ahead. I don't know who was first.
I think Anna was first.
Okay, go ahead, Anna. All right, do we have somebody else? Anna, are you on mute?
Anna, are you there? Okay, let's move on to Asher and then we can come back.
All right.
So yeah, I noticed you said that, send the product to 5 to 10 people, but if this is like an entrepreneurship kind of thing, then once you send your product to people, then they'll try to steal your business idea, right?
Not usually in my experience. And we've done this with a lot of people. I mean, because so this is like in my mind, this was a food product. So it's usually pretty hard to kind of like work backwards from there. You could use an NDA, but
Wait, what's NDA?
A non-disclosure agreement. So that's a legal document. You can feel free to check out the legal founder fundamental if you want.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, typically when we send product out to people, I don't have many examples of people knocking it off. I don't know, some of you guys who are entrepreneurs on the line. Yeah. If it's a tech platform, yes, I would get them to sign an NDA. But this was, in my mind, this was my bakery, right? So I don't know if you'd get somebody to sign an NDA for a baked good. So it depends on what you're sending out. Depends on what you're sending out. I have signed NDAs before people showed me their tech platform. That's super common. Yeah, very common. Yeah. So I wouldn't send them everything. I typically, if you've got a platform, you would send them a demo, or you would, walk through. You would walk through a demo for them. So they don't see the code. They're not seeing what you're doing. They may see the end result, but it's really hard to copy if they don't know the behind the scenes. And honestly, ideas are pretty similar all around. So you can't really hold them to not copying the idea, because typically there's probably somebody else also working on the same idea. What you can own is the execution. All right. Okay. Last piece where I kind of said some simple things that you could do is start to track and feedback. So again, our brain really loves rewards. So the minute that you can cross things off, the better. Anna, yeah, go ahead. You're back. I don't know if you're able to hear us. Maybe just type it out on chat.
I don't have questions.
Oh, okay, great. Not great, but if you do, feel free to pipe up again. So, again, those of you who have to-do lists, super satisfying, right? To cross something off, to check something off. Keep doing that. That's actually something that will reward your brain to say, hey, great job, let's keep going. Again, if you have goals and you like to set them in your head, our brains like visual. Our brains like points on the board. So if you can, the more visual, the better. The one on the left is actually a trick from Seinfeld, if you guys know the community. So he used to mark an X on every single day that he was able to write jokes. So if he wrote that day, he did an X. So track your metrics visually, make sure that you are keeping it on a board. And if you have other ways of kind of keeping track, these are, again, some quick ideas. So Pomodoro Timer, if you guys don't know what that is, you can Google it. There's a lot of apps for that. You work with 25 minutes and then you take 5-minute breaks. So when you're starting to keep track, this is one way to keep yourself on track, to be like, okay, I'm going to be focused for 25 minutes and then I'm going to take a 2 to 5 minute break. Another visual tracker is something called the paperclip strategy. So if you guys have not heard of this, again, super easy. And I didn't realize this, but my mom actually did this with me when I was a little kid. Really useful for stuff that you hate to do. So if it's tedious, if it's onerous, and there's a certain number of times that you have to do something. So she did it for me when I had to practice piano and do scales. So every time I practiced one, I would put a coin over. And by the time I put from one side to another, I knew I was done. So paperclip strategy works the same way, where you're taking a paperclip from one jar to another. It does not have to be a paperclip. You don't have to be that literal. It can be anything. It can be thumbtacks. It can be a visual, like a virtual thing that you're moving from one to another. I do it actually when I'm grading papers. I highlight different names. So it works the same way, even if it's not physical, as long as it's visual. And last but not least, there's a ton of apps for tracking. So if you are starting to look for trackers, go online. There's a ton of them that are really great. I personally really love kind of a visual board. So those of you who have worked with me, you guys all know, I have a board that's got all the thank you notes that are from the people that I've worked with. And that's a visual motivator for me in terms of the wall of thanks. You might have the vision board that I talked about in the very beginning. Team tracker. So somebody asked about kind of writing things down on a piece of paper. What's the good for that? That actually is a really big motivator for teams to be able to see when things get done. So if you've never been in Trello works that you can actually move different tasks from one column to another. So you can actually physically see when things are accomplished. Again, really huge motivator for people who like to see progress, and we all like to see progress. If you're so lucky to have an accountability buddy, commit yourself to a due date for something that you don't have a due date for. So somebody I was working with wanted to create a workshop, and they kind of went, well, there's no urgency. I don't really need to do it, but it's good if I have it. So what we talked about was creating a fake deadline to an accountability buddy. So somebody that is going to hold you to that date, and you have to present to them. So that's an example of a way to kind of keep yourself on track and also to keep feedback. Last but not least, if you do have a team, have regular feedback reviews. Get that in place and scheduled so that it is regular, and that you can actually start to use regularly. So if these are for people who are really struggling to make sure things happen, because guess what? Especially for things we hate to do, we'll give up at this point. Right? If you're not seeing results, if you're not seeing some visual trackers, it's really, really hard to keep going. All right. I'm sure all of you have great ideas as well on what helps you keep track and get feedback, or keeps you kind of motivated as you keep going. What kind of measuring do you do? What kind of things do you get motivated on? Some other things I'm going to talk about in a bit on goal hacks. I love challenges. I actually really thrive on them. So there's an app that I have that I get to go on fitness challenges. That keeps me on track. That keeps me motivated. So type out on chat. Does anybody have any other tools that are really useful that you've used? Okay, well, if not, then I would download one of these things. Yeah, crossing out usually does work too. So if you are kind of a pretty visual person, do that, and keep a visual tally of what that looks like. If you can on your phone, make sure you actually keep a running tally of the completed stuff. Because oftentimes on the phone, once it's completed, it goes out. You have to physically kind of go back and filter and see all the completed tasks. Ooh, I love that. Asher, that's awesome. I love that. So Asher says that he records his emotions and experiences on a reflective journal. So I would encourage that. Something I really encourage all of my students to do as well is if they have a goal that they're tracking against, at the end of every week, give themselves a rating of like how close or how satisfied they are with their own progress. Whiteboard calendar with check boxes. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so I would encourage you guys to use some of these strategies. If you have a tracker, a visual tracker, something that's visual where you can actually see things build up. So maybe it's the number of times that you've done something. So for every single time, add a component to something. Maybe it's a block, maybe it's a piece of paper with, you know, the good old thermometers. Do that. It really does help to keep you on track and motivated and see where your progress is at. Yeah, these are great. These are great ideas. Who has a similar personality? So I think, Asher, that one to me is really great for a purpose. And in fact, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So you're kind of getting there already. Okay. So I'm seeing a lot of ideas here to be offline, which I totally appreciate. So I'm the same way. I actually have a lot of things on paper as well. So if you are a visual person, make sure you have something that is visual, that motivates, that helps you keep track. So like I told you guys, I have a visual board of all the guys that I've worked with. So whether it's like their logos, I get a lot of postcards from them. If you don't want to have something like that, then you can actually default to something that'll keep track of the impact that you're making. So again, go back to your purpose and think about a metric that will help you measure your impact. For me, it's all about the number of people I touch, the number of people I can connect with. So I actually do have a running tally of what that looks like. Okay. So think about what that is for you. I know some of you have businesses. I know some of you have businesses that you want to launch. You might have another metrics that you are really inclined to measure. Make sure that's front and center, whatever that looks like and feels like. Maybe it's a number of customers you've served. Maybe it's a wall of all the thank you cards that they've given you, right? Remember that exercise we did in the very, very beginning of the thank you card? These things are visual reminders of why you're in it, what keeps you going, and it helps you keep track of your progress. Because sometimes it's really hard to remember that we've done good in the world. So make sure you're doing that. Awesome. Yeah, that is actually really great. So imagine if you actually had a thermometer of like all the butter tarts that you sold and you just keep adding. How great would that be? That would be amazing. Okay, so take a moment to jot down some of those ideas that we've talked about and all the ones that have been posted on chat. Jot down some ideas that will help you keep track and feedback and start using at least one. See, I'm going to say at least one, no more than two. So if you're jotting down 3 or 4, don't do them all. Do 1 to 2 that will help you track and feedback over the next week. That is new. So something that you haven't been doing. Right. So we had, you can scroll honestly on here. Some people have whiteboard calendar with check boxes, reflective journal, a fictional character. I love the vision board. So I'm going to give you guys a couple of different ideas. So here's some that I found online where literally they had just a wall. You may not want to draw on your wall, but I think you can like post a piece of paper. In fact, I think that's what it is. They just put a giant piece of paper where you can see the progress. The second one, something that I love to call Talisman. So I learned this pretty early on, and I still do this, where I have visible things that keep me grounded to my purpose. So you can call it talisman, a token, whatever it is. It's a reminder of why you're doing what you're doing. And something, if it can actually help you keep track, even better. So if it's got a counting thing on it, great. Yeah, that's great. The timeline and milestones is on the left. Yeah, absolutely. So you can actually start to mark off where you've been, where you are now. These are really some key ways to keep you on track and to make it so that you can actually achieve your goals. We're all really good at like writing things down or starting to set them in our minds. Where we usually fall apart is in the execution. And usually it's either in not being prescriptive enough in our image and our metrics, or we're not staying motivated. So hopefully these last two steps are really going to be able to cement that for you guys. Yeah. Surround yourself. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's like a great vision board, Wayne. So I also have things, many people are super shocked when I tell them about my happy folder. I have an email folder that's called Happy. So the thank you notes, the things of encouragement. So you want to make sure your purpose is really visible and handy whenever you need it. You never know when you're going to get to a day where it just feels like, why am I doing this again? Yeah. Yeah. So create a happy folder for yourself, and pull it out like it's in case of emergency. So go into it. Okay. A few more goal setting hacks. If you do have any other ideas, please post it. One thing that is really easy, they call them stackable goals. So I just call it like, make it easy for yourself to do the task. If there is already a task that you're readily doing, let's say you are, before you get to bed, you're brushing your teeth, right? Hopefully. So put something beside your bed that's going to remind you that you have to kind of do that goal. So maybe it's meditation. So put the yoga mat beside your bed. For me, it's actually running shoes. So I have my running shoes right beside the couch. So that reminds me that before I sit down for the night and veg out, I'm going to do whatever goal I've set for myself because my running shoes are right there. For the goal that I had set about making lunch twice a week, maybe it's right before you're about to do something before turning in for the night, that you are going to put that thing there so that it reminds you that you have to make it. So these are called stackable goals. I call it make it easy for yourself. Okay. Yeah, no, you're welcome. I'm glad these tips are helping. Another real good goal setting life hack, especially when you're running out of energy. So if Pomodoro is not great because you don't love apps, then set a timer where you can actually go and do something different for 5 minutes at the 25-minute mark. So set a timer for yourself for 25 minutes. At the end of where that alarm goes off, go do something different. Go physically somewhere else in your space to do something different. It helps you process a little bit better. So remember, again, that 50 pieces and 11 million. We need a way to refresh ourselves so we can get those 50 pieces in. The third thing that works like a charm, especially for those of you who get deadly scared of letting people down, declare something in public, whether it's to a friend, whether it's on social media, whether it's a team challenge. I find that when I say it out loud to people, the chances of that happening is so much higher. It's almost as good as writing it down. Well, you are writing it down, right? Because you're declaring to somebody else. All right. Anybody else have any goal hacks that they want to share? Some really great things that you guys have already typed out. Oh, Asher left. I'm going to answer the question on purpose. So it was over a series of different introspections. So I actually got my coaching certification about a decade ago. And at that time, we really went through a lot of purpose. And in fact, I keep not changing it, but evolving it, because it's pretty much stayed the same from before, but I keep tweaking the words and I keep kind of thinking about different people I can impact. So sometimes it gets bigger, sometimes it gets a little bit more refined. And then sometimes I'll open it back up again. So if you are having trouble with that first step of purpose, don't get so lofty. Honestly, just think about who the most important person that you're doing this for. And if it's for yourself, great. What is it that is fueling you? Is it some value? Is it an end goal in sight that you're trying to aim for? So is it freedom? Is it empowerment? So think of some of these big values that really fuel you in terms of purpose. All right. In summary, you really want to make sure that you have these 5 pieces in place. Oftentimes we have bits and pieces of these ones, but you really need to have as many of the 5 as possible to help you get to great goals. So make sure that you are rooting at something really super important for you so that you can commit. Have a clear vision of what good looks like. So if you haven't done this step, I encourage you to talk it through with somebody, and preferably come up with 3 to 5 metrics that really define what good looks like. The third piece is make sure that that vision is challenging enough. If it's too easy, amp up the challenge. Don't be afraid to kind of give yourself a goal that scares you a little bit. The next one is use some of these tools to actually create a work back plan. So I've given you lots of different versions. Use one of the ones that works the best for you. I've given you some links that could work as well. And then last but not least, make sure you're tracking it. Make sure you're tracking your progress and seeing the progress so that you can constantly feedback and go, okay, what do I need to refine? Especially going back to step number 2 on clarify. All right, and feel free to reach out. Those are my contact information. Seek me out, reach out if you do run into any problems on goal setting. Thank you so much for spending the time with me, and hope everybody has a good week. I am around for, out of curiosity, how many people set New Year's resolutions? Just raise your hand. Does anybody set New Year's resolutions? Yeah, I see a couple of hands. And in fact, what they say is set them. So, you know, I was actually a huge proponent of not setting them, but after I was reading through all the research, set them, but then carry it out in those steps that I showed you, right? Don't stop at setting the resolutions. Actually start to envision, what does good look like? What are some of the milestones that will get you there? And then start doing some really simple things so that your brain starts to get excited about the progress that you're making. Oftentimes we fall down because we're not seeing the progress and we give up. Yeah, Jeff.
One of the reasons, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, one of the reasons I don't set New Year's resolutions is because I find that if I set the resolution and then I wait for New Year's to do it, and then there's just too much hype and I never get it done. So
that's why we do this session today. I
set them all through the year. I just do it.
Perfect.
Then I can't do New Year's resolutions. It's like setting myself up for failure.
Yeah, I cheat a little bit in honesty. I don't set New Year's resolutions. I start setting them now. So actually, this is the time where I start to set goals for the upcoming year, because I'm looking ahead to be like, okay, what do I need to start thinking about in order to set those goals? And quite frankly, I don't set many. I probably only set about 3. I don't set that many so that I can actually get to them. Yeah, Timo?
Yes. Hi, Judy. Thank you so much for today's presentation. It was very insightful. My question is about accountability partners. I've tried this before with friends, but usually, you know, it's good for the first and second month, and then it kind of dwindles off. And with your friends, it's also very hard to kind of like keep everyone accountable.
Yeah.
So I was gonna ask, what I want to ask you is, do you have any suggestions or advice as to, you know, how you can go about getting an actual accountability partner?
Yeah, I've seen it work really well with people who have similar goals. So they all are trying to either learn something or they're all trying to achieve something. So look for those groups that have very similar goals in sight. So if you're trying to launch a business, go into a group that is all trying to launch a business. So you can kind of keep each other accountable. Another one that has worked really, really well is a mentor of sorts. So they're not really accountability buddies anymore, but they're actually vested in your success. So they're checking in with you every month, every 3 months. You kind of set a cadence with them.
Do you have any suggestions as to the best way to get a coach?
There's lots of different ways, right? So for one, make sure you do reach out to your small business center. Like they have great resources. Joshua's on the line here. I know Marlena and myself and Diana, we all work with a lot of entrepreneurs. So again, seek out if you're part of a either a small business center in a municipality, that's the easiest way to go. Or if you're part of a school system, like if you're part of York, you can come to Y-Space, you can go to other institutions, they'll all pretty much take you. So they can help you with some guidance and maybe some mentoring if you kind of make it past into the programs that they're offering. Short of that, honestly, meetups, Eventbrites, they've been a wealth of resource. Like I was shocked at how many things are out there. And if you really are intent on looking for people of similar mindset, it's possible.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions or comments that you want to share with each other? Yeah. So a couple of resources, people are asking about resources. So I put a whole bunch in the kind of the PowerPoint as well as the worksheet. But something that I would start testing out for you guys is literally a tracker. Like if you could invest in something, if you don't want to do it digitally, do it visually. It really matters when we start to see progress, and that dopamine hit will enable you to keep going. That's the biggest kind of advice I would have. And then everything else you can tweak. You can tweak your clarity goals, you can tweak your metrics, but that tracker needs to be in place so that you can see your progress. Great. Thank you so much for your time. I hope this was helpful. I hope it sets you up for the new year. All the best of luck.
And hopefully I'll see you all again in the new year when we start again in January. Take care, everyone. Bye.